Ethan Hawke's life is not the story of a man who chased fame, but of a soul who chased meaning, and that difference is what makes his journey unforgettable, because from the very beginning he never fit neatly into Hollywood's shiny box of predictable stardom, and instead of trying to polish himself into something artificial, he leaned into his doubts, his curiosity, his insecurities, and his restless hunger to understand what it means to be human. Growing up with a childhood marked by movement, instability, and quiet observation after his parents' divorce, learning early that life does not follow a straight line and that identity is something you build piece by piece, not something handed to you, and even as a young boy he showed an unusual sensitivity to stories, words, and emotions, not because he wanted applause, but because storytelling gave him a way to make sense of chaos, and when acting entered his life, it wasn't as a dream of red carpets, but as a tool to explore ideas, pain, love, fear, and purpose, which is why even his earliest roles carried a seriousness beyond his years. And when Hollywood first noticed him, many assumed he would become just another heartthrob, another young face destined to burn bright and fade quickly, but Ethan Hawke quietly refused that path, choosing depth over safety and risk over comfort. And his breakout role in Dead Poets Society did more than introduce him to the world. It stamped his identity as someone who believed that words matter, that art matters, that questioning authority matters, and that carpe diem is not about recklessness but about honesty, about having the courage to live a life that feels true even when it costs you approval. And while fame arrived early, fulfillment did not, because success without inner alignment can feel empty. And Hawke has never hidden the fact that he struggled with self-doubt, creative fear, and the pressure of expectations. Especially in an industry that rewards repetition and punishes evolution, yet instead of numbing himself or conforming, he leaned harder into learning, reading obsessively, writing novels, directing films, performing theater, and deliberately choosing projects that scared him, confused him, or challenged him, even when they offered less money or less visibility, because for him, art was not about winning, but about searching. And this mindset became the foundation of a career that defied traditional metrics of success as he moved fluidly between independent films and mainstream cinema, between Shakespearean stages and experimental storytelling, proving that longevity comes not from chasing trends, but from honoring curiosity. And perhaps what makes Ethan Hawke so inspiring is not that he avoided failure, but that he openly embraced it, speaking candidly about bad performances, weak films, creative missteps, and emotional lows, reminding the world that mastery is not the absence of mistakes, but the willingness to keep showing up honestly. And as his career evolved, so did his philosophy, becoming increasingly vocal about the dangers of commodifying art, of reducing creativity to algorithms and profits. And he argued that art should disturb, comfort, question, and illuminate rather than simply entertain, a stance that often placed him at odds with commercial expectations but earned him deep respect among thinkers, artists, and audiences craving authenticity. In his collaborations, particularly those built on long-term trust and patience, revealed his belief in slow creation, in allowing characters and stories to age alongside the people portraying them, reflecting real life rather than manufactured drama. And through it all, Ethan Hawke remained deeply human, flawed, searching, sometimes uncertain, but always sincere, openly discussing love, heartbreak, fatherhood, regret, and growth, never pretending to have life figured out, which is precisely why people listen to him, because he doesn't speak from a pedestal, but from the same ground everyone else stands on, reminding us that fulfillment is not found in applause, but in alignment, not in perfection, but in persistence, and not in certainty, but in courage. And by refusing to let Hollywood define his worth, Ethan Hawke redefined success on his own terms, showing that a meaningful life is built by choosing depth over distraction, truth over image, and purpose over popularity, even when the path is lonely, unclear, or misunderstood. Ethan Hawke's journey becomes even more powerful when you understand that his greatest battles were never with critics, box office numbers, or industry gatekeepers, but with his own fear of becoming comfortable. Because comfort, to him, was the real enemy of creativity. And he has often spoken about how success can quietly poison an artist if it convinces them to stop risking failure, which is why at moments when his career could have coasted easily, he deliberately chose uncertainty instead, stepping into theater. When film fame peaked, returning to independent cinema when studio offers promised safety, and pushing himself into directing and writing not because he was sure he would succeed, but because he was terrified of stagnation, and this fear-driven courage shaped a philosophy that resonates far beyond acting, a belief that life rewards those who remain students rather than those who declare themselves masters. And as he aged in an industry obsessed with youth, Hawke refused to chase relevance through reinvention or image manipulation, choosing instead to deepen his substance, allowing time to carve lines into his face and wisdom into his voice. Understanding that aging is not a decline but a shift, a transition into roles that require gravity, vulnerability, and emotional honesty, and this acceptance of time became one of his quiet rebellions against a culture that treats aging as a flaw rather than a gift. And when he spoke about love and relationships, he did so without romantic illusions, acknowledging heartbreak, mistakes, and growth with a rare transparency that made his words feel lived and rather than rehearsed, explaining that love is not sustained by passion alone but by attention, patience, and humility, lessons he learned not from theory but from experience. And his reflections on fatherhood revealed the same grounded wisdom, as he described the responsibility of raising children not as shaping them into ideal outcomes, but as creating an environment where they can discover who they already are. A mindset that mirrors his approach to art itself, where control is replaced by curiosity and certainty by listening. And as criticism followed him throughout his career, sometimes harsh and sometimes unfair, he developed an almost philosophical relationship with judgment, recognizing that applause and rejection are equally fleeting, and that allowing either to define you is a form of surrender, and instead he anchored his identity in process rather than outcome, showing up to the work regardless of recognition, believing that meaning is found in dedication, not validation. And this internal compass is what allowed him to remain creatively alive while others burned out or disappeared, because he never outsourced his self-worth to the audience. And as the entertainment world shifted toward speed, spectacle, and consumption, Hawke's voice grew more deliberate, more reflective, reminding younger generations that art is not content and creativity is not currency, that the most important work often feels uncomfortable, slow, and misunderstood at first. And his insistence on protecting the soul of storytelling in a profit-driven era made him not just an actor but a quiet philosopher of modern creativity, someone who articulated what many feel but struggle to express. And perhaps the most inspiring truth about Ethan Hawke is that he never presents himself as an example of a rival, but as a case study in becoming someone still searching, still learning, still questioning, and in a world obsessed with certainty, that openness becomes revolutionary because it gives permission to evolve, to change direction, to fail publicly, and to keep going anyway, proving that a meaningful life is not built by avoiding fear, but by walking directly through it, carrying curiosity as your compass and integrity as your anchor. Ethan Hawke's story reaches another level of meaning when you look at how he thinks about legacy, because unlike many who chase permanence through fame, he understands that nothing lasts forever, and that this impermanence is not something to fear, but something to respect. And he has often spoken about mortality not with despair, but with clarity, seeing death as the quiet force that gives urgency and value to life, reminding us that time is not an enemy, but a teacher, and this awareness shapes the way he works, loves, and creates, pushing him to choose projects that feel necessary rather than impressive, conversations that feel honest rather than strategic, and a life that feels full rather than loud. And as the years passed, he became less interested in being admired and more interested in being useful, especially to younger artists who feel lost in a system that rewards visibility over substance. And instead of offering hollow motivational slogans, he offers something rarer: permission to struggle, to feel confused, to doubt yourself, and to understand that uncertainty is not a flaw, but a sign that you are still awake. And this perspective makes his voice powerful in a time when many feel pressured to present confidence, even when they are falling apart internally. And Hawke openly challenges the myth that success brings peace, explaining that peace comes from alignment, from knowing why you do what you do even when the results are unclear. And his refusal to separate art from life allows his work to carry emotional weight because it is rooted in lived experience rather than manufactured emotion. And when he talks about creativity,